Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey not into the past as it was, but into a shadow version, a distorted echo of what might have been. We're going to step carefully, quietly, into a world where the dice of destiny rolled differently, where the relentless grind of battle found a starkly different victor. Tonight we ask the question, perhaps one of the most chilling, what ifs in all of human history? What if Germany had won the Second World War? Close your eyes for a moment, if you will. Breathe in slowly. Now, picture a map, not the one you know, but one redrawn with the conqueror's blunt, unforgiving hand. Imagine the year is not the familiar present, but perhaps 1965 or 1970, and the triumphant anthems of a victorious Third Reich have long since faded into the background of daily life, a constant, low-frequency thrum beneath the surface of a forcibly pacified world. This isn't just about battles won and treaties signed. It's about the very air you breathe, the cobblestones beneath your feet, the faces you see in the public square. It's about a reality so profoundly altered that even the sun seems to cast different shadows. You awaken, perhaps, in what was once Paris. But this isn't the Paris of old. The Eiffel Tower still stands, a gaunt, skeletal sentinel against a gray dawn, but it's dwarfed by colossal, brutalist structures of steel and concrete that pierce the sky, monuments to a new, unyielding power. The Arc de Triomphe, once a symbol of French military glory, is now merely a backdrop for parades of perfectly synchronized, gray-clad legions, their boots echoing with a chilling precision on the Champs-Élysées. The smell in the air is different. Not the familiar aroma of fresh baguettes and strong coffee, but a faint metallic tang, perhaps of industry, perhaps of something less definable, something sterile and cold. As you step out onto the street, the chill of the morning air bites harder than you remember. There's a quiet in the city that feels unnatural, an absence of spontaneous chatter, the casual laughter that once defined these ancient streets. Faces are drawn, eyes are downcast, or they meet yours with a practiced neutral gaze, devoid of curiosity or warmth. You quickly learn the subtle art of avoiding eye contact, of blending into the flow, of becoming an anonymous cog in the vast, well-oiled machinery of the greater Germanic Reich. Every public space is adorned with banners, emblazoned with symbols that are now ubiquitous. The eagle, the swastika, stark and uncompromising. They are on the buildings, on the armbands of patrols, on the public transportation, even subtly woven into the patterns of the new, officially sanctioned fashion. This is Europe, remade, not rebuilt. For much of the old, messy, vibrant Europe has been systematically swept away, deemed inefficient, impure, or simply inconvenient. Vast swathes of the continent, particularly in the East, have been ethnically cleansed and re-engineered into vast agricultural colonies, managed with chilling efficiency by settler populations. The once proud nations are now mere administrative zones, their languages tolerated only in the privacy of homes, their historical narratives rewritten to serve the new masters. Poland, Czechoslovakia, the Baltic states. These names exist now only in hushed whispers or forgotten history books, superseded by new German designations. The concept of nationhood, as we understand, has been brutally suppressed, replaced by a monolithic, pan-European identity dictated from Berlin. Think of the children. You see them on their way to school, neatly dressed, marching in disciplined lines, their young voices raised in unison as they sing hymns not to God, but to the Führer and the Reich. Their textbooks speak of a glorious history of Aryan dominance, of a righteous struggle against degenerate forces, of a scientific future built on racial purity and technological might. Their playgrounds are not filled with the haphazard joy of children, but with organized drills and exercises, preparing them for a life of service, whether in the armed forces, the bureaucracy, or the labor camps. The innocence of childhood, that brief, precious window of unburdened joy, is a luxury that has long been eradicated. The propaganda is not shouted from every rooftop, not anymore. It's too ingrained for that. Instead, it's a constant, soothing murmur, emanating from every radio, every public address system. The news is always good, always about the efficiency of the state, the defeat of the last lingering pockets of rebellion, the boundless prosperity of the Reich. It's a hypnotic drone that slowly, inexorably, reshapes thought itself. Dissent isn't just dangerous, it's almost unthinkable. Who would question such pervasive, unshakable power? Who would dare to interrupt the seamless narrative of progress and order? The very concept of truth has been redefined, hammered into shape by the relentless propaganda machine, until what is and what should be are indistinguishable. Feel the subtle chill that permeates society. It's not just the weather. It's the constant, unspoken awareness of surveillance. Every public interaction, every purchase, every casual conversation is potentially observed, recorded, analyzed. The fear isn't of an overt knock on the door, not usually, but the insidious, creeping knowledge that the system is always watching, always listening. This isn't a world of overt oppression in every moment, but a total psychological control, where the population has been conditioned to self-censor, to internalize the rules, to become their own jailers. The prison bars are invisible, forged from fear and ideological conformity. Yet they are perhaps stronger than any made of iron. The dream, the chilling ambition of a 1,000-year Reich, has become the grim reality. The world has been reorganized into spheres of influence, with the German heartland as the undisputed hegemon. Great Britain, if it still exists as a separate entity, is a docile protectorate, a compliant vassal. America, perhaps, fought on for a time, a lone beacon against the encroaching darkness, but eventually, even its vast resources and democratic ideals were overwhelmed by the sheer, unyielding force of the new order, or perhaps it merely retreated into a fortress America, leaving the rest of the world to its fate. The oceans are patrolled by German U-boats and surface fleets, the skies by their formidable air forces. Resources from across the globe flow inexorably to the industrial heartland of Central Europe, fueling an economy of endless war production and grandiose architectural projects. This new world order is one of absolute control, built on the ashes of liberty and human dignity. It is a testament to what happens when fanaticism triumphs, when the worst angels of our nature are allowed to reign supreme. It's a world where the future is not open-ended, but meticulously planned, structured, and dictated for generations to come. And as we delve deeper into this alternate history, we will explore not just the grand political maneuvers and the shifting maps, but the quiet, personal tragedies, the daily indignities, and the enduring, perhaps flickering, embers of resistance in a world that has learned to kneel. It is a world you now inhabit, a world where the very concept of freedom has been relegated to the dusty archives of forgotten past. Welcome to the new order. The final crackle of static died out, leaving an echo of a voice that was no longer there. The radio, once a lifeline of news and propaganda, now seemed to hum with an oppressive silence. The last broadcasts, for those who dare to listen, had been grimly succinct. No more soaring speeches from Churchill, no defiant calls from the Élysée, only the stark, unadorned pronouncements, delivered with the chilling precision of a well-oiled machine. The war, the great, tumultuous war, was over. But the peace, for those who live beneath its shadow, was a thing far more terrifying. You feel it first in the air itself. A cessation, not just of the distant thunder of artillery or the whine of air raid sirens, but of a deeper, almost subconscious tension. The air no longer thrums with the hidden fear of the next bomb. The sky, for the first time in years, seems merely a vast, empty canvas, no longer scored by dogfights or choked with the smoke of burning cities. Yet, this new quiet isn't peaceful. It's an absence, a gaping void where the familiar chaos once reigned. It feels less like the end of a nightmare and more like the beginning of an infinitely longer, colder dream. Imagine you are standing on a street in what was once London or Paris or Warsaw, though its name has likely been changed now, or at least re-accentuated. The rubble is still there, a testament to the brutal efficiency of the conflict, but the fires have long since been extinguished. The smell of ash and damp concrete lingers, a faint, metallic tang in the autumn air. What strikes you, overwhelmingly, is the uniformity. The buildings, even the damaged ones, are slowly being cleared, not rebuilt with defiant fervor, but systematically, almost clinically. The streetlights, when they flicker on, cast long, stark shadows, illuminating not bustling crowds, but sparse figures hurrying home before the curfew. Look around you. The Union Jack, the tricolor, the white and red of Poland, they are gone, replaced everywhere by the hooked cross, fluttering from every flagpole, every municipal building, every public square. It's a bold, stark symbol that seems to suck the color out of everything around it. Even the sky above seems to take on a grayer hue, as if acknowledging a new, severe order. The sounds, too, are different. The cacophony of normal city life, the cheerful chatter, the rumble of civilian buses, the distant laughter of children playing, these have been replaced by a more disciplined, more ominous symphony. The rhythmic crunch of boots on cobblestones, a sound you hear constantly now, belonging to the patrols that move with an unnerving precision. The low murmur of German spoken, not just by soldiers, but by new administrators, new overseers, their voices clear and commanding, cutting through the silence. And then there are the loudspeakers, erected at regular intervals, broadcasting official announcements, new regulations, or the solemn, often martial music of the new regime. It's not loud, not blaring. It's just always there, a constant, low-level drone that seeps into your consciousness. You are here, among the vanquished, or perhaps, for those in Berlin, among the victors. Yet, even in Berlin, the jubilation is muted. There are no wild street parties, no unbridled revelry. Instead, there is a stern, almost exhausted satisfaction. The victory parades, when they occur, are exercises in military precision, a display of overwhelming force and discipline, not spontaneous celebration. The soldiers, tired but resolute, march with an unwavering gaze, their faces etched with the grim resolve of men who have achieved total victory. It's a victory of iron and will, not of joyous abandon. The cheers are organized, orchestrated, lacking the genuine spontaneity of a people suddenly freed from existential threat, because the threat for them had merely been transferred onto the rest of the world. For the ordinary citizen, regardless of which side they once belonged to, a new reality solidifies with each passing day. Your identity, your very existence, is now filtered through the lens of a new, absolute ideology. The newspapers, now uniform in content and tone, carry only the official narrative. History books are being rewritten with alarming speed, erasing inconvenient truths and inconvenient people. Artists, writers, thinkers, they either fall into line, embrace the new aesthetic of power, or they simply vanish. The cafes, once hubs of lively debate, are now places for quiet observation, where conversations are hushed, glances guarded. You learn quickly to self-censor, to choose your words with an almost surgical precision, to let your thoughts remain unspoken, perhaps even unthought. Consider the children. They grow up with a world where the swastika is as natural as the sun, where the uniforms are symbols of authority, not oppression. Their games in the parks are watched, their songs are taught, their loyalty cultivated from the earliest age. The memories of the old world, of democracy, of freedom, will become faint whispers or worse, dangerous lies, confined to the dwindling number of those who still remember and who dare to share them only in the deepest, darkest hours of the night. If at all, this cold, new dawn isn't a transition, it's a refoundation. The systems that govern daily life, the schools, the courts, the police, the economy, are not merely influenced but wholly remade. The new laws are swift, uncompromising, and applied with chilling efficiency. Dissent, no matter how small, is a luxury no one can afford. The prisons are full, and for those deemed irredeemably undesirable or resistant, other, far more permanent solutions are quietly, meticulously implemented. There are no public trials for these enemies of the Reich. They simply cease to exist, their absence a silent warning to others. The silence of this victory is its most profound characteristic. It is the silence of free speech being extinguished. It is the silence of empty places where communities once thrived. It is the silence of fear, settling like a shroud over every heart. It is the silence of the world holding its breath, waiting for the next decree, the next directive, the next step in an inexorable plan. The bombs have stopped, yes, but the war, in its most insidious and total form, has only just begun. The sun rises each morning, painting the sky in colors that seem too vibrant for this new, grim reality, illuminating a world utterly transformed, stripped bare of its former hopes and dreams, and awaiting whatever the new masters of Europe, and indeed much of the world, might yet conceive. The guns, at last, fell silent. But it was not the peace the world had longed for. No, this was the silence of a continent holding its breath, a vast, terrified quiet punctuated only by the rhythmic thud of jackboots on cobbled streets and the distant, tinny strains of martial music from omnipresent loudspeakers. The war, by any conventional measure, was over. Germany had won, and a chilling, meticulously planned dawn was breaking over a subjugated Europe. Imagine, if you will, The early autumn of 1945. You were standing in what was once Paris, perhaps, or Prague, or Warsaw. The familiar landmarks are still there, mostly, but they wear a new, grim uniform. Towering swastika banners unfurl from public buildings, their blood-red background stark, violent contrast to the soft, gray light filtering through a sky often smudged in industrial haze. Street names have been meticulously scraped away and replaced with German equivalents, painted in a stark, angular script. The charming cafe where you once lingered over coffee and conversation now serves ersatz, a thin, bitter brown liquid, and the chatter is subdued, laced with the sharp, guttural cadences of the occupying forces. The very air feels heavier, thick with unspoken fear, and the acrid tang of coal smoke, mixed with something else, something less tangible, yet profoundly pervasive, the sense of total control. This was the Greater Germanic Reich, stretched taut across the spine of Europe, a vast, contiguous empire forged in fire and maintained by an iron fist. It was not just a military occupation. It was a societal re-engineering on a scale the world had never witnessed. From the Atlantic coast to the Ural Mountains, the Reich's vision of a racially pure, German-dominated continent was being systematically hammered into existence. The New Order, they called it, a bureaucratic marvel of chilling efficiency, where every aspect of life, from the food on your plate to the thoughts in your head, was subject to meticulous oversight. Walk with me through the new reality. You see it in the architecture, of course. The bomb-scarred cities rebuilt not with nostalgic nod to their past, but with a brutalist, monolithic vision of the future. Colossal, grand-faced structures rise, designed to awe and intimidate, their severe lines reflecting the unbending will of the regime. Gone are the frivolous flourishes, the individualistic quirks of old European design. In their place, a severe, functional grandeur, each building a silent testament to power. And the people? You see them too. The faces are often pale, their eyes downcast, a universal code of caution learned quickly. In the crowded markets, where goods are scarce and ration cards are the only currency, transactions are swift, hushed. No one lingers. No one chats unnecessarily. Every overheard word could be a slip. Every gesture a misinterpretation. Every stranger a potential informant. The subtle art of denunciation had become a national sport in some territories, encouraged by posters promising rewards for loyalty to the Reich. Beneath the veneer of an orderly society, a more sinister transformation was underway. The grand plans for racial purification were not whispered theories in obscure pamphlets anymore. They were daily realities. In the occupied eastern territories, vast swathes of Ukraine, Belarus, and parts of Russia, the General Plan Ost was being executed with ruthless precision. Indigenous populations, deemed subhuman Slavs, were systematically displaced, starved, or worked to death in newly established agricultural communes and mining operations. Their fertile lands were being cleared, parcel by parcel, for German settlers, lured east by promises of vast estates and a life free from the urban squalor of the Reich's industrial heartlands. The former inhabitants were simply disappearing, not always with bang, but often with the chilling whisper of a midnight knock, a train journey to an unknown destination, or the sudden, final silence in a remote forest clearing. It was an extermination not just of people, but of entire cultures, languages, and histories, replaced by a planned, engineered German future. In the West, the policy was more insidious, a slow, cultural asphyxiation. French and Dutch children, deemed to possess Aryan traits, were sometimes taken from their families and placed in German homes, to be raised as loyal citizens of the Reich. Their heritage, their very identity, was erased by decree. You would see them, sometimes these children, speaking flawless German with a carefully constructed loyalty, their eyes betraying nothing of the past. It was a quieter, more insidious form of genocide, aimed at the soul rather than merely the body, and for those groups targeted for total annihilation. The Jews, the Roma, homosexuals, the disabled, the shadows had simply deepened, becoming an eternal night. Their presence, once a vibrant thread in the tapestry of European life, was now an absence, a gaping, echoing void. The special camps, once shrouded in wartime secrecy, were now part of the open, brutal landscape, their smoke plumes a constant, distant reminder of the ultimate fate for those who did not fit the Reich's pristine, horrifying vision. The Reich was not just about territory and resources. It was about the very spirit of its people. Education was rigorously controlled, history rewritten, art censored. You might encounter an old man, perhaps furtively listening to a banned BBC broadcast on a shortwave radio. The faint, crackling voice is a defiant echo from a world that had ceased to be. Or a woman, carefully hoarding a pre-war book, its pages dog-eared, a last tangible link to a different time. These were dangerous acts, small acts of rebellion, that could cost you everything. The omnipresent Gestapo and SD agents moved like ghosts through society, their reach seemingly limitless, their methods brutally effective. Suspicion was the currency of interaction, trust a forgotten relic. Every interaction was a gamble, every smile potentially a mask. So, beneath the triumphant swastika, Europe simmered. It was a continent held in a cold, rigid embrace, a vast network of puppet states and annexed territories, all funneling their resources and labor into the German war machine. For the peace that had come was merely a pause, a retooling for the next inevitable expansion. The shadow that had fallen was long, and it stretched not just over the cities and fields, but deep into the very hearts of the people, where hope dwindled to a spark, carefully guarded against the crushing weight of an eternal night. This was not just a political victory. It was a fundamental redefinition of what it meant to be European, to be human, under the unrelenting gaze of the victorious Third Reich. And so, as the dust settled not into peace, but into a heavy, suffocating stillness, a new dawn broke across Europe. Or perhaps a new twilight. The grand pronouncements have been made, the maps redrawn, the flags of conquest unfurled with chilling finality. But away from the echoing halls of power, far from the polished boots of the victorious, life, in its most brutal and tenacious form, had to continue. This was not the exhilarating, dangerous life of the battlefield, but something far more insidious, a quiet attrition of the spirit. This was the era of the rationed soul, lived beneath the unyielding weight of the boot. Imagine, if you will, the slow, reluctant awakening of a new day in what was once London, Paris, or Warsaw. The chill that seeped into your bones wasn't merely from the morning air. It was a persistent dampness of a hope extinguished, a future rewritten. The alarm clock, if you were lucky enough to possess one that still functioned, might be an old, wind-up model. Its insistent ring cutting to the pre-dawn quiet, a stark contrast to the silence that otherwise permeated the streets. You'd stretch, perhaps, the ache in your muscles a familiar companion, a testament to yesterday's relentless labor. Breakfast was a ritual of meager sustenance. A thin, gray gruel, perhaps, made from whatever scarce grain was available, or a slice of stale, dark bread, tasting faintly of sawdust and regret. The bitter, watery coffee, brewed from roasted acorns or chicory, offered warmth but little stimulation. You'd eat quickly, silently, the clinking of spoons on chipped enamel bowls the only sound, each bite measured, savored, for it had to last. You felt the hollow ache in your stomach even as you ate, a perpetual companion, a constant reminder of the regime's control over your very metabolism. Then out into the chill, the streets already stir with a ghostly procession of fellow citizens, all heading towards their assigned duties. The grand boulevards of yesterday were now avenues of utilitarianism. Statues of fallen national heroes had been toppled, replaced by stoic German eagles or monumental, blocky representations of the Führer. The familiar language of the street had been subtly, insidiously, infiltrated by guttural German commands and directives painted on walls, stark and unyielding. You'd pass a patrolling Ordnungspolizei, their heavy leather coats and gleaming helmets and ever-present, intimidating silhouette, their eyes scanning, assessing. You learned to keep your gaze down, to blend, to become invisible. Your day would be spent toiling. For many, it was a factory floor, endlessly producing munitions or machinery for the German war effort. The rhythmic clang and hiss of the machines a monotonous soundtrack to your captivity. For others, it was the fields, working under the watchful eyes of overseers, extracting the harvest that would feed the fatherland. Or perhaps it was the debris-strewn urban landscapes, clearing rubble, rebuilding, always rebuilding, but never for your nation, always for theirs. The work was often backbreaking, repetitive, designed to exhaust the body and pacify the mind. You were a cog, nothing more in a vast, indifferent machine. Individuality, creativity, ambition, these were dangerous luxuries best suppressed. The sheer, grinding monotony of it all was, in its own way, a torture. It slowly, systematically, eroded the sense of self, leaving behind a hollowed-out vessel. But the most pervasive, the most visceral element of this new existence was the omnipresent reality of the ration book. This small, official document, stamped and restamped, was a true arbiter of your daily fate. Every slice of bread, every gram of meat, if you were fortunate enough to receive any, every drop of cooking oil was meticulously accounted for. You spent hours queuing a silent, shuffling line of humanity outside the sparse shops, rain or shine, hoping against hope that the promised delivery of potatoes or a slither of ersatz sausage would actually arrive. The air in these queues was thick with mixture of despair and a strange, desperate camaraderie. A shared glance, a whispered word, a silent acknowledgement of collective suffering. The quality of the food, when it came, was often abysmal. Thin, watery soups, bread made with fillers that scraped the throat, meager portions of overcooked vegetables. Meat was a luxury, fish a forgotten dream. The constant, gnawing hunger was a spiritual drain, a quiet hum beneath every thought, every action. It made you vulnerable, made you docile, made you desperate. And desperation, of course, was fertile ground for the black market. Risky, yes, but sometimes unavoidable. A stolen chicken, a sack of illicit flour, traded for a precious family heirloom or a clandestine skill. The clandestine exchanges, the furtive glances, the fear of discovery by the Geheime Staatspolizei. The Gestapo, who saw such dealings not merely as economic crimes, but as acts of defiance, a challenge to the regime's total control. Even your thoughts felt rationed. The radio, if you still had one that hadn't been confiscated, blared only the official broadcasts. Triumphant news of German progress, stirring martial music and relentless propaganda. The voice of the fatherland seeped into every corner, explaining, justifying, threatening, promising a glorious future that never quite arrived for you. Newspapers, heavily censored, offered a distorted reality, a mirror reflecting only what the regime wished to see. Public posters depicted caricatures of the defeated, celebrating the glorious new order, always with a strong, Aryan fist guiding the way. You learned to read between the lines, to hear the silence more than the words, to see the reality hidden beneath the veneer of triumph. Fear, too, was a constant, subtle hum, an invisible collar around your neck. You spoke in hushed tones, even in your own home. You learned to mistrust not just strangers, but sometimes even neighbors, for the watchful eyes of informers were everywhere. A careless remark about the Führer, a moment of weakness bemoaning the past, a perceived lack of enthusiasm for the new order. Any of these could lead to a sudden knock on the door in the dead of night, followed by disappearance. The silence after such an event was deafening, a stark lesson to all who remained. You learned self-censorship, a meticulous internal editor, ensuring every public utterance was bland, compliant, innocuous. Children were the canvas for the future. Schools, now under strict German control, taught a revised history, glorifying the Third Reich, vilifying its enemies, and indoctrinating the young into the new ideology. Their textbooks were filled with images of heroic German soldiers and inferiority of other races. Your own children, your flesh and blood, could return home with words and ideas that were alien, even hateful, to you. It was a silent, agonizing battle to maintain their true heritage, to whisper stories of the past, of a world that once was, without jeopardizing their future or your family's safety. As evening fell, the streets would empty quickly. Curfew was strictly enforced, and the few remaining streetlights cast long, dancing shadows, turning familiar corners into menacing corridors. Homes were often cold, fuel scarce, and the gloom of inadequate lighting matched the mood within. Families huddled together, perhaps around a flickering candle or a small, carefully tended fire, finding solace in proximity. Stories might be told. Old songs hummed quietly, a defiant act of cultural preservation. But even in the sanctuary of your own home, the ghost of surveillance lingered. You spoke in whispers, the threat of hidden microphones, or a child's innocent revelation at school, ever present. This was the rhythm of the rationed soul. A life stripped bare of joy, of vibrant colors, of independent thought. The constant, dull ache of hunger, the exhausting, meaningless labor, the pervasive, chilling fear, and the relentless, suffocating pressure to conform. You learned to exist on the margins of your own life, to navigate a world that actively sought to crush your spirit, to diminish your very humanity. It was a slow, spiritual starvation, a systematic erasure of identity, leaving behind only the bare, desperate instinct to survive one ration day at a time, under the unblinking, heavy gaze of the boot. And as the initial fervor settled, as the victory parades faded into carefully curated newsreels, and the new iconography became as common as the morning sun, a different kind of reality began to sink in. A reality woven not just from laws and decrees, but from whispers and walls. The air itself seemed to thicken, laden with unspoken fears, a quiet hum of omnipresent vigilance that penetrated every home, every street, every mind. You see, conquering a continent is one thing. Truly governing it, bending its diverse peoples to a singular, unwavering will, is quite another. The new regime understood this with chilling clarity. They knew that the grand pronouncements of a glorious future were potent, yes, but they were fragile without the iron fist of control pressed against the very pulse of daily life. And so, the machinery of internal security, already finely honed, was expanded, refined, and deployed with meticulousness that bordered on artistic. Imagine, if you will, stepping out onto a crisp autumn morning in what was once Paris or Prague, or even London. The streets are clean, perhaps even pristine, but the quiet is different. It's not the peaceful quiet contentment, but the watchful quiet of 1,000 eyes, seen and unseen. The posters, stern and glorious, stare down from every available surface, their messages unequivocal: unity, strength, loyalty. Your radio, once a source of varied news and entertainment, now broadcasts only the official narrative, a seamless symphony of triumph and righteousness. Even the simple act of choosing a book from a public library becomes an exercise in self-censorship, the shelves purged of anything deemed ideologically unsound, leaving behind only the sanctioned histories, the approved literature, the endless volumes on racial purity and agricultural efficiency. This was a new normal, not just a set of rules, but an atmosphere and omnipresent presence. The state was not just in the government buildings. It was in your neighbor's eyes, in the polite yet probing questions of the block warden, in the casual conversation at the market. Every community had its designated informers, individuals who, for various reasons, genuine belief, fear, or a chilling desire for advancement, became the regime's eyes and ears. They were the kindly old woman who knew everyone's habits, the ambitious young man eager to prove his loyalty, the bitter soul who held a grudge. You never quite knew who they were, and that, of course, was the point. The insidious genius of it all was that it forced you to suspect everyone, to monitor your own tongue, to keep your thoughts safely behind the locked doors of your own mind. Yet, even in this meticulously constructed cage, the human spirit, stubborn and often foolishly hopeful, could not be entirely extinguished. Beneath the surface of outward conformity, a faint spark of dissent continued to glow, a quiet refusal to accept the imposed reality. It began subtly, as most things do, a shared glance of understanding between strangers on a train, a whispered joke about the Fuhrer that died on the lips almost as soon as it was born, a single, worn book passed furtively from hand to hand under the cover of darkness. These were the first tremors, the almost imperceptible shifts in the foundations of a new order. Perhaps it was a former soldier, haunted by memories of a world that no longer existed, who found solace in listening to a forbidden foreign broadcast, the static-laced voices a defiant echo of freedom. Perhaps it was a university student who, despite years of indoctrination, stumbled upon a hidden text, a philosophical treatise that dared to question the very nature of power and felt a cold, exhilarating jolt of recognition. Or perhaps it was simply a mother, watching her child being taught sanitized history and feeling a profound, visceral grief of the truths that were being systematically erased. These small acts of defiance, isolated and seemingly insignificant, were the seeds of what would become the resistance. They were not grand declarations of war, not yet. They were acts of quiet refusal. The hidden radio receiver, a delicate spiderweb of wires and tubes that sang a rebellion in the dead of night. The hand-copied poem, subversive in its very existence, passed amongst trusted friends, the deliberately misplaced wrench in a factory producing armaments, the scrawled graffiti in a dark alley, a fleeting, defiant symbol of a forgotten world. But the regime, ever watchful, was not blind to these flickers. The The security apparatus, the Gestapo, the SS, the SD, their names alone were enough to curdle the blood in your veins, were remarkably efficient, chillingly so. They were not clumsy brutes. They were meticulous, intelligent, and utterly ruthless. Their methods were a carefully calibrated blend of fear and psychological manipulation. You would wake one morning to the absence of a neighbor, a family simply gone, their apartment door sealed, their name excised from the community record as if they had never been. No explanation, no official announcement. Just a chilling void, a silent warning to all who remained. Or perhaps, one night, the knock would come. A sharp, insistent rap that resonated not just through the door, but deep within your chest. You would stand there, heart hammering, knowing that this sound, in this hour, meant only one thing. And then the questions. Gentle at first, then probing, then accusatory. The relentless interrogation. The slow erosion of your composure. The careful piecing together of information, often from those closest to you. The casual mention of a friend's name, a fleeting reference to a past conversation, designed to unravel your carefully constructed defenses. And if you were deemed guilty, if even a hint of disloyalty clung to you, the consequences were swift and absolute. The journey to the camps was not always violent, not initially. It was often a clinical, bureaucratic process, devoid of emotion, which somehow made it even more terrifying. You would be stripped of your identity, your possessions, your dignity, systematically reduced to a number, a statistic in the regime's vast ledger of control. The camps themselves, those grim, gray monuments to human cruelty, were not just places of punishment. They were also a powerful deterrent, their very existence a constant, looming threat that kept the vast majority in line. The price of dissent, then, was not merely imprisonment or death. It was erosion of trust, the gnawing suspicion, the self-censorship that became second nature. It was a crushing weight of isolation, the fear that even your own thoughts might betray you. It was watching friends vanish, families torn apart, knowing that a single misstep, a careless word, could plunge you into the same abyss. The silence in the public squares, the carefully neutral expressions on faces, the subtle avoidance of eye contact. These were the unspoken scars of society living under the watchful eye of a victorious, unforgiving power. And yet, despite it all, those whispers continued. Behind the walls of conformity, in the hidden corners of the human heart, the flame, however dim, refused to die. A poignant, stubborn refusal to fully surrender, a testament to the enduring, if often tragic, resilience of the human spirit. For even in the darkest of times, when hope seemed a dangerous luxury, some small part of humanity insisted on remembering what it meant to be free, and sometimes, just sometimes, even dared to fight for it. The victory, when it came, was not an end, but a beginning, a brutal, methodical, and utterly comprehensive beginning. For those who had devoted their lives to a perverse ideology, the cessation of hostilities was simply the signal to lay down the tools of war and pick up the blueprints of an even grander, more chilling ambition, the architecting of a master race. The dream, whispered in beer halls and enshrined in esoteric texts, was now to be etched into the very genetic code of a continent. Imagine, for a moment, the quiet hum of industry shifting. No longer just tanks and planes, but the production of a new kind of human being. The landscape of victorious Greater German Reich wasn't merely one of conquered territories and rebuilt cities, but a meticulously planned human evolution. From the Baltic to the Black Sea, from the Atlantic coast to the Urals, the vast swathe of newly acquired Lebensraum was not just for German farmers and soldiers, but for the selective breeding of a perfected species. You would see it in the newly designed settlements dotting the vast plains of the East, not just utilitarian outposts, but carefully curated environments. The buildings, stark and functional yet possessing a monumental grandeur, spoke of a regime obsessed with order and permanence. Here, the families deemed racially pure were settled, their lives orchestrated from cradle to grave. No longer was a haphazard lottery of natural selection trusted. Instead, the state became the ultimate matchmaker, the grand gardener of humanity, pruning and cultivating with a chilling, clinical precision. The cornerstone of this new world was the Reich Bureau for Racial Hygiene and Population Policy. No longer merely an advisory body, it became a ministry with unparalleled power, its directives flowing down to every village and town. Its mandate was simple yet staggering. to ensure the biological health and racial purity of the German people, and by extension, the new European order. This meant a two-pronged approach. The meticulous weeding out of the unfit, a process already well underway, and the fervent cultivation of the superior. Consider the paperwork. Oh, the reams of paper. Every citizen from birth was cataloged, their family trees meticulously charted back generations. Ancestry became a matter of national security. Blood group, hair and eye color, skull measurements, even nose shape, all were recorded and analyzed. Before marriage, couples underwent rigorous genetic assessments, interviews with state-appointed eugenicists, and psychological evaluations. The goal wasn't love, but suitability for producing ideal Aryan offspring. Compatibility was measured not in shared interests, but in shared genetic purity. For those deemed racially valuable, incentives were lavish. Financial bonuses for multiple children, preferential housing, access to the best schools, and guaranteed positions within the burgeoning state bureaucracy or the prestigious Schutzstaffel. The SS, now the true aristocracy of the Reich. Motherhood, for the correct kind of woman, became a revered national service, celebrated with medals and public accolades. You would see their images everywhere. Strong, blonde, blue-eyed women surrounded by their equally ideal children, beaming out from propaganda posters, their serene faces embodying the future. The legendary Lebensborn program, once a semi-secret initiative, was massively expanded, transforming into a vast national network of maternity homes, child-rearing centers, and even dedicated breeding facilities. These weren't places for unwed mothers to hide their shame, but rather revered institutions where carefully selected women, often wives of SS officers or those of exemplary Aryan stock, gave birth under optimal conditions. Their children, from the moment of their first breath, were considered the purest fruit of a nation, destined for leadership roles, imbued with an unshakable sense of racial destiny. You could almost hear the quiet, satisfied murmur of the nurses, the precise click of their instruments, as another perfect specimen was welcomed into the Reich. But the architecture was not merely about building up. It was, perhaps even more so, about tearing down. The other side of the racial coin was the systematic eradication of all that was deemed inferior. The initial genocidal campaigns against the Jews and Roma, brutal as they were, had merely been the precursor. With victory achieved, the scientific pursuit of racial purity intensified. Slavic populations in the East, deemed suitable only for servile labor or outright removal, faced relentless programs of forced sterilization and demographic restructuring. Those with hereditary diseases, mental illnesses, or any perceived physical imperfections were subjected to compulsory sterilization, ensuring their tainted bloodlines would end. The quiet, bureaucratic hum of the racial hygiene offices belied the immense human suffering and existential terror they inflicted. You might be strolling through a bustling German city square, admiring the clean lines of the new architecture, the disciplined uniforms of the passers-by, the healthy, robust children playing in the parks. Yet, if you look closely enough, if you knew where to look, you would notice the subtle absence. The absence of certain faces, certain body types, certain voices. The absence of the old and the infirm, no longer visible on the streets. The absence of the creatively degenerate, whose art, music, and literature had been systematically purged. The absence of anyone who didn't fit the meticulously crafted mold. Children, from their earliest days, were enrolled in state-run youth organizations, the Jungvolk and the Bund Deutscher Mädel for the younger ones, transitioning to the Hitler Youth and League of German Girls. Their education wasn't just academic. It was physical, ideological, and absolutely relentless. Every lesson, every game, every song, every story reinforced the superiority of the Aryan race, the unwavering loyalty to the Führer, and the destiny of the German people to rule. History was rewritten, science reinterpreted, and even mathematics taught through the lens of racial purity and national strength. You would see their bright, eager faces, their unquestioning obedience, a testament to the chilling efficacy of total indoctrination. Their play wasn't just play. It was training for a future of unwavering purpose, a future built on the bones of the conquered and the undesirable. The very language changed. Words deemed too foreign or too evocative of a decadent past were systematically removed or replaced. A new vocabulary of strength, purity, and destiny permeated public discourse. Even personal names became subject to regulation, with only pure German names encouraged, sometimes even mandated. The subtle coercion of societal pressure, backed by the omnipotent power of the state, ensured conformity in every aspect of life. The Aryan dream, then, was not just a political program. It was a biological and cultural revolution. It was the attempt to engineer humanity itself, to strip away perceived imperfections and sculpt a race according to a rigid, pseudo-scientific ideal. The victors believed they were not merely conquering nations, but conquering the very laws of nature, accelerating evolution to produce a species worthy of a 1,000-year Reich. And as the years turn into decades under the iron fist of this new order, you would witness a world transformed, a society molded, and a human population meticulously, terrifyingly architected. The silence of a perfectly ordered, perfectly pure society would be deafening. And as the dust settled over a conquered Europe, the victors, not content with mere dominance, turned their gaze toward the vast, fertile plains of the East. For them, this was not just a theater of war, but a blank canvas, a tabula rasa upon which to scrawl their grand, terrible vision. The land stretching from the Baltic shores to the ancient forests of Russia, once vibrant with their own complex histories, were now simply known as the East, a raw, boundless resource waiting to be tamed, emptied, and then meticulously refilled according to a chilling blueprint. You see, for the architects of this new order, the victory in the West was merely the prelude. The true heart of their ambition lay here, in the concept of Lebensraum, or living space. Imagine, if you will, the hum of a cartographer's pen, meticulously redrawing borders not just on paper, but on the very flesh of the earth. Old nations vanished, subsumed into new, chillingly bureaucratic entities. The Reichskommissariat Ostland, the Reichskommissariat Ukraine, and further east, the sprawling, nebulous territories destined for what was termed general administration. Picture yourself, perhaps, standing on a windswept hill in what was once Poland or Ukraine. The air is thinner now, colder, laden with a sense of displacement. The familiar landmarks of your village begin to blur, not just in the passage of time, but from deliberate erasure. Field after field, once tended by generations of families, now lies fallow, or is being plowed by German settlers, brought on long, rumbling trains from the heartland of the Reich. Their faces are eager, yet stern, imbued with a sense of divine right to this newfound prosperity. They bring with them a new language, new laws, and an uncompromising certainty that this land, by destiny, is theirs. For the indigenous populations, the Poles, the Belarusians, the Ukrainians, the Lithuanians, the Latvians, the Estonians, this was not a new beginning, but a profound ending. The vibrant tapestry of their cultures was deemed inconvenient, an obstacle to the grand design. Slavs, in this new racial hierarchy, were categorized as unmentioned subhumans, fit only for the most brutal forms of labor, or more chillingly, for systematic reduction. Their cities, once centers of learning and trade, were earmarked for radical redesign, their ancient churches and synagogues often demolished, making way for monuments to the new order, or simply for the widening of roads to accommodate the endless flow of German troops and supplies. You might wake one morning to find your neighbor gone, not just moved, but vanished. Or perhaps one of the ubiquitous gray lorries rumbles down your street, stopping at every second house, and you watch, numb with fear, as families are summarily evicted. Their homes are immediately reassigned, their belongings often left to rot, or scavenged by the few who dare. The lucky ones are forced onto trains, destined for the industrial heartlands of Germany, to toil in factories and farms, their hands worn to the bone, their lives perpetual cycle of exhaustion and meager rations. These Ostarbeiter, identifiable by their distinctive OSD badges, were little more than slaves, their value measured solely by their productive capacity. But even this grim existence was preferable to the fate of others. The vast, meticulously planned system of extermination continued its ghastly work. The Einsatzgruppen, those chilling mobile killing squads, had swept through the newly conquered territories like a plague, emptying towns and villages of their Jewish populations, their Roma communities, and any perceived political dissidents. The scale of the violence, the cold, methodical nature of it, is almost too vast to comprehend. It wasn't a frenzy of war, but a meticulous, bureaucratic process of eradication, designed to leave no trace, no memory, Imagine, if you can, the silence that descends upon a town where thousands have simply ceased to be. A silence so profound it seems to swallow the very light. The bounty of the East was prodigious, and the new masters wasted no time in seizing it. The fertile Black Earth region of Ukraine, the breadbasket of Europe, was to be the larder of the Reich, its grain diverted to feed the German populace and its armies, even as the local population starved. The oil fields of the Caucasus, the mineral wealth of the Urals, the vast timber reserves, all were slated for extraction, powering the vast industrial engine of the thousand-year Reich. The infrastructure of the East was rapidly transformed. Railways re-gauged at German standards, new autobahns planned to crisscross the conquered lands, all designed not for benefit of the locals, but to facilitate the efficient flow of resources out of the East and into the heart of the German Empire. The initial chaos of conquest slowly gave way to an oppressive, yet chillingly predictable, order. Resistance inevitably flared. Partisan groups, born of desperation and a fierce, unyielding love for their homelands, hid in the forests and marshes, striking at German convoys, sabotaging supply lines. But for every act of defiance, the retribution was swift and unimaginably brutal. Entire villages were razed, their inhabitants massacred as collective punishment. The fear became a palpable entity, a constant companion. You learned to keep your eyes down, to speak softly, to trust no one, for suspicion was a luxury few could afford. Under this new sun, the future of the East was clear. It would be a vast agrarian colony, populated by a scattered, subservient native population, overseen by a German master race. Cities would be reduced in size and importance, their populations culled, their functions primarily administrative or as centers for resource processing. The vision was not one of coexistence, but of absolute, unquestioning control, a grand, immutable feudal system on an industrial scale. The ancient cultures, the vibrant languages, the very identities of millions were destined to wither and die, replaced by a uniform Germanic order. So, as the decades turned into a century, what was once the East became simply the Ostland, a vast, silent testament to a victory that reshaped the world, not with explosions and triumphant parades, but with the cold, meticulous precision of a geographer's pen, drawing lines of subjugation and despair across an entire continent. The echoes of vanished nations, like ghosts in the wind, whisper across the endless plains, a melancholic symphony of what was, and what now, chillingly, was not. And you, standing there, might feel the weight of it all, the immense, suffocating silence of a future stolen. The thunder of artillery had long since faded, replaced by the hushed, almost imperceptible turning of pages. The conquest of the land was merely the first act. Now, the real war began, the silent, relentless siege of the mind. For what good was a territory, after all, if the hearts and thoughts of its inhabitants remained stubbornly untamed, unaligned with the grand vision of the new European order? This was a project of meticulous, patient indoctrination, a carefully orchestrated symphony of whispers and erasures designed to reshape the very fabric of memory and identity. Imagine, if you will, the early days of this mental reconstruction. The initial shock of defeat gave way to a chilling, bureaucratic calm. One by one, the pillars of the old world began to crumble, not with explosive force, but with the quiet, methodical precision of a demolition expert. Libraries were the first to feel the chill touch of the censor. You might have seen the trucks arrive, loaded with stern-faced men in uniform, their breath pluming in the crisp air as they systematically emptied shelves. Books deemed unfit, tales of democracy, of freedom, of the very nationhood that had just been so decisively extinguished, were piled high, sometimes merely confiscated, sometimes consigned to the celebratory, if somewhat grim, bonfires that briefly illuminated town squares. The scent of burning paper, a peculiar mix of ash and ink, became a subtle olfactory marker of the shifting intellectual landscape. What remained were carefully curated selections, German classics, revised histories and technical manuals, the literature of efficiency and obedience. But the true battleground, the most fertile soil for this insidious new ideology, was the schoolroom. Step inside, if you can, one of these newly reformed classrooms, perhaps in a former French village or a bustling Polish city. The scent of chalk dust is still there, the scuff marks on the wooden floors, but the faces are different. Many of the old teachers, those whose loyalties were deemed suspect or whose minds too steeped in forbidden past, have vanished, replaced by fresh cadres, often young, fervent, and meticulously trained in the new curriculum. Observe the children. Their uniforms a little too new, a little too precise. Their textbooks are crisp, bound in severe covers. History, as you know it, has been meticulously rewritten, not merely retold, but fundamentally inverted. The glorious past of their own nations, once a source of pride, is now presented as a misguided deviation, a path of weakness and error that inevitably led to their current, deserved subservience. The narrative now glorifies strength, order, and the benevolent. Unifying vision of the greater German Reich. Maps and geography lessons no longer show independent borders, but rather vast, sweeping zones of influence, with Germany at the triumphant heart of a burgeoning continental empire. Biology lessons might subtly introduce concepts of racial hierarchy, while civics teaches a paramount importance of communal duty over individual liberty, all presented with an unimpeachable air of scientific authority. You might be a parent watching your child come home, reciting new songs in halting German, or proudly displaying a drawing of the new flag. A subtle shift in their gaze, a new set of phrases that echo the radio broadcasts, will begin to etch themselves onto your heart. It was a profound, almost surgical alienation. The children, innocent and pliable, became the unwitting carriers of the new truth, their young minds absorbing the carefully distilled essence of the regime's ideology, often with more zeal and less questioning than their wary elders. To subtly correct them, to whisper the old stories, carried with an unspoken, chilling risk. The children themselves, encouraged to report incorrect thoughts or subversive speech, could become unwitting agents of state, eroding the very bedrock of familial trust. Beyond the classroom, the airwaves carried the constant hum of control. The radio, once a source of varied information and entertainment, became a tireless conduit for the official narrative. News bulletins, delivered in measured, authoritative tones, spoke only of triumphs, of production quotas met, of the grateful cooperation of the integrated territories. Every success was attributed to the superior organization and vision of the new order. Every setback, swiftly dismissed or blamed on lingering, subversive elements. Music, too, was curated, carefully shore of any hint of dissent or individualism, replaced by martial anthems. Folk songs celebrating industriousness and grand, soaring symphonies approved by the Ministry of Culture. Imagine sitting in your small apartment, the dim light from a single bulb casting long shadows, listening to the crackle of the radio. The voice is calm, soothing, utterly confident. It tells you that your efforts are contributing to a greater whole, that your sacrifice is noble, that your very existence is now part of an inevitable, glorious future. You might remember the vibrancy of the old broadcasts, the diverse voices, the debates, the dissenting opinions. Now, there is only one voice resonant and omnipresent, weaving a seamless tapestry of manufactured reality. To turn it off felt like a small act of rebellion, a defiant silence in the face of the unceasing drone. But even that felt heavy with a sense of isolation. Newspapers, once a diverse chorus of opinions, became monochrome organs of the state. Headlines screamed of unity and progress, while the small, seemingly innocuous articles subtly reinforced the ideological lines. Editorials, penned by unseen hands, elucidated the wisdom of the new policies, often with paternalistic tone that bordered on the patronizing. What was not printed was as important as what was. The blank spaces, the unmentioned atrocities, the vanished figures from public life. These were the ghostly silhouettes of truth, haunting the margins of the official record. You learned to read between these silent lines, discerning the true state of affairs not from what was said, but from what was deliberately omitted. For intellectuals, artists, and writers, the re-education was a particularly brutal and insidious process. Universities became centers of ideological purification, their faculties purged of any who dared to cling to old doctrines. Research was redirected. Art patronized only if it served the state's aesthetic and political goals. To publish, to teach, to create, one had conform, to sing in the required key. Many retreated into silence, their brilliant minds becoming prisons of unspoken thoughts. Others, out of fear or a desperate hope for survival, became collaborators, their talents bent to the service of the new masters, crafting propaganda, justifying the unjustifiable, slowly, agonizing and erasing their own integrity with each carefully chosen word. You might meet an old professor, once vibrant with intellectual fire, now a hollowed-out shell, speaking only in approved platitudes, his eyes holding the ghosts of countless unuttered truths. The goal was not merely outward compliance, but an internal transformation. It was a long game, played out over generations, aiming to create not just obedient subjects, but genuinely re-educated Europeans whose very desires and aspirations aligned with the tenets of the victorious regime. The subtle, pervasive pressure of the state infiltrated every facet of life. Youth groups, workers' associations, even neighborhood watch committees, all became extensions of the ideological apparatus, subtly promoting conformity and encouraging vigilance. The erosion of trust was a natural byproduct. Who among your neighbors might be a willing ear for the authorities? What seemingly innocent remark might be misconstrued? The weight of self-censorship, the constant internal editor, became a silent, ever-present companion. And so, the minds were slowly, meticulously brought under control. Not always through brutal force, though that remained a terrifying undercurrent, but through the patient, methodical re-engineering of information, the quiet rewriting of history, and the gentle, persistent shaping of future generations. It was a victory not just over armies, but over memory itself, a profound and chilling testament to the power of a meticulously crafted narrative to supplant the very truth of existence. The past, it seemed, was not merely prologue. It was a malleable thing, ready to be reshaped in the image of the victor, leaving behind only the faintest echo of what once was. The world had settled into its new, unsettling rhythm. The dust, both literal and metaphorical, had begun to fall, revealing not the ruins of a defeated enemy, but the carefully constructed scaffolding of a victorious Reich, stretching its dominion across continents. The initial, tumultuous period of conquest and consolidation, with its grand pronouncements and the thunder of marching boots, had given way to something far more insidious, the quiet, pervasive hum of control. This new peace was not the cessation of conflict, but rather its sublimation into a meticulously managed internal struggle, where the battleground was no longer the battlefield, but the human mind. And at the very heart of this new order, beating with a cold, unwavering pulse, was a Gestapo, the Geheime Staatspolizei, the secret state police. They were not merely a law enforcement agency. They were the nervous system of the totalitarian state, the ever-vigilant architects of fear, designed to maintain order not through justice, but through absolute, unquestioning conformity. Their shadow, long and impossibly dark, stretched over every street, every home, every whispered thought. You might recall the initial relief some felt, perhaps, at the seeming end of chaos, the promise of security. But that security came at a price, and the currency was your very autonomy. Imagine, for a moment, the quiet chill that began to seep into everyday life. The traditional legal system, with its ancient, albeit imperfect, protections, had been systematically dismantled. In its place stood a jurisprudence of the state, where law was merely the codified will of the Führer, and order meant the absence of even the faintest deviation from ideological purity. Your rights, if they could even be called that, were contingent on your unwavering loyalty. No longer were you innocent until proven guilty. Now, you were merely unproven as loyal. A vast, intricate network of laws, decrees, and regulations, often vague and deliberately overlapping, ensured that almost any act could, if deemed necessary by the authorities, be construed as an act of treason. A careless word, a forgotten hile, a misplaced book, these could now be seen as subversive acts. This was where the Gestapo truly excelled. Unlike traditional police, they weren't primarily concerned with what you did, but with what you thought, what you might think, and what you represented. Their primary weapon wasn't the pistol, but the informer, the neighbor whose curtains always seemed to twitch when you pass, the colleague who listened just a little too intently to your opinions, even a child, innocently parroting overheard conversations to a teacher. All became potential conduits for the Gestapo's intelligence network. You might never see an agent in uniform, but you were always aware of their presence, an invisible, omnipresent force. It was societal architecture built upon mutual suspicion, slowly eroding the very foundations of trust between people. How do you truly relax when you know your own spouse, your own children, could, intentionally or not, become instruments of the state? The you are their perspective truly comes into its own here. Think of your own home, once a sanctuary, now a potential listening post. Conversations grew quieter, more guarded, layered with subtle codes and euphemisms. What might seem like an innocent comment about the quality of the latest bread ration could, if interpreted through the distorted lens of official paranoia, become a critique of state economics. Humor, that vital human escape valve, became a dangerous tightrope walk. Jokes about the leadership or the regime, even among trusted friends, were risks. A moment of spontaneous laughter, if overheard and misconstrued, could lead to a sudden, chilling silence. And in that silence, you could almost hear the click of an office door closing miles away as another anonymous report was filed. The infamous Volkswirtschaft, or People's Court, became the ultimate symbol of this perverted legal order. Presided over by figures like the notoriously vitriolic Roland Freisler, these were not courts of justice, but rather theatrical condemnations, designed to terrify and demoralize. The accused, often already broken by Gestapo interrogations, were subjected to vitriolic tirades, denied proper legal representation, and given no real chance to defend themselves. Sentences were predetermined, often death, and delivered with chilling speed. Imagine being dragged before such a tribunal, knowing that the outcome was a foregone conclusion, your fate sealed not by evidence, but by ideological necessity. The calm, bureaucratic efficiency with which these human lives were extinguished was, in itself, a form of dark humor, a testament to the chilling power of a system that had perfected the art of processing dissent into dust. But for the vast majority, the Gestapo's presence manifested not in a courtroom drama, but in the mundane, constant dread of the unexpected, the arbitrary house search, the sudden identity check on the street, the unannounced visit to your workplace. These were not random acts, but calculated performances designed to maintain a heightened state of anxiety. You learned to keep your papers in order, your home meticulously tidy, your opinions to yourself. You learned to perform loyalty, even if you felt none. You saluted with vigor, displayed the correct portraits, and participated in mandatory rallies, all the while constructing an elaborate internal fortress to protect your true thoughts. It was an exhausting existence, a constant stage play where the audience was invisible but omnipresent. And then there was a knock on the door. Not the friendly rap of a neighbor or the familiar ring of a delivery man, but sharp, insistent series of raps that seemed to echo through the very foundations of your being. Often in the dead of night, or the quiet hours of dawn, it was a sound that heralded the complete obliteration of your world. No warrant was needed, no explanation offered. A few curt words, an order to dress, and you were gone. Your family might never know where, or why, or if you would ever return. There was no appeal, no habeas corpus. You simply vanished, absorbed into the vast, anonymous machinery of the state. These disappearances served a dual purpose. They removed perceived threats, but more importantly, they created a powerful, unforgettable example, sowing a fresh crop of terror in the hearts of those left behind. The silence that followed such an event was deafening, a palpable void that served as a constant reminder of the Gestapo's absolute power. This was law and order in the new German order, a system of meticulously crafted terror, designed not merely to punish dissent, but to eradicate the very possibility of it, leaving behind only the long, dark shadow of fear. The world, you see, did not simply erupt in celebratory fire or crumble into immediate anarchy after the final, chilling pronouncements from Berlin. No, it settled. It settled into a quiet, almost suffocating order. The new maps, freshly printed in grim, angular fonts, were smoothed over, territories absorbed like drops of ink into blotting paper. The flags, once vibrant with the colors of nations, were folded away, replaced by the stark, unblinking crimson and black. An unnatural stillness descended, a pervasive hush over streets where, only weeks before, frantic whispers and the rumble of distant battles had been the common soundtrack. It was the quiet of a vast, meticulously maintained mausoleum, where every creak of the floorboards, every breath, felt amplified and illicit. But beneath this imposed calm, in the shadowed corners of vanquished cities and the deep, silent valleys of occupied lands, something else began to stir. Not a roar, not a defiant shout, but a low, persistent hum. It was the sound of a seed cracking open in frozen earth, the almost imperceptible tremor before an avalanche. This was the genesis of the unseen resistance, the first, tentative sparks in the dark. Imagine yourself there, You might be a factory worker in Lodz, your hands, once nimble with pre-war craftsmanship, now callous from endless shifts producing armaments for the Reich. The rhythmic clang of the presses, the acrid scent of oil and hot metal, drowns out everything but the dull ache in your muscles. Yet one Tuesday, as the foreman's back is turned, your wrench slips. Not accidentally, not quite. The bolt, meant to secure a vital component, is tightened just a fraction less than required. Later in the den, another worker, a gaunt man with eyes that never quite met yours but missed nothing, gives you a barely perceptible nod. A shared secret, a minuscule act of sabotage that might, just might, shave a few hours off the lifespan of a tank engine on the distant Eastern Front. It's not much. It feels like spitting into an ocean, but it's something. Or perhaps you're a librarian in Paris, surrounded by the ghosts of forbidden books now locked away, replaced by approved volumes extolling Aryan virtues. Your days are spent cataloging propaganda, your nights in a small, cold flat. But one evening, a whispered name, delivered by a seemingly innocent patron asking for a non-existent poetry collection, sends a shiver down your spine. It's a name you've heard before in hushed tones, connected to a small printer still operating in secret. You remember a passage from a forgotten text, a code perhaps, embedded in the spine numbering. You adjust a label, ever so slightly, shifting one book from its proper place to another, a tiny beacon in a sea of enforced ignorance. It's a message, a relay of information, a thread in a nascent web. The first acts were rarely heroic, never flashy. They were born of desperation, of a profound, visceral rejection of a new reality. It might be a baker diluting the flour for the soldier's bread, a farmer accidentally driving his cart through a telegraph line, a cleaning woman in a commandanter pocketing a discarded, non-sensitive document that still held a fragment of useful information. These were the micro-rebellions, the quiet acts of defiance that blossomed in the fertile ground of resentment and fear. They were almost invisible, easily dismissed by the all-seeing eyes of the Gestapo as mere incompetence or random misfortune. And that, paradoxically, was their strength. The true challenge, however, was connection. In a world where every neighbor could be an informer, every conversation a trap, the forging of trust was an act of immense, almost suicidal courage. You learned to read the unspoken language of shared glances, the subtle inflections in a voice, the precise angle of a hat on a stranger's head, a tap on a pipe from the apartment below, a specific tune hummed too loudly in the market square, a chalk mark on a lamppost. These became the new dialect of survival. Consider the village of Oradour-sur-Glane, or rather, what might have been its equivalent in this altered timeline, a quiet, unassuming place in occupied France. The harvest is brought in under watchful eyes. Children play muted games in the dust. The church bell tolls on schedule. But in the back room of the local pub, where the aroma of stale beer and cheap tobacco hangs heavy, a small group gathers. The schoolteacher, a grizzled farmer, a young widow who lost her husband in the early days of the conquest. They don't talk of rebellion. They speak of crop yield, of the weather, of the rising price of eggs. But when a farmer mentions a broken fence down by the old creek, or the teacher laments the difficulty of finding good paper for the children's lessons, they are not speaking of fences or paper. They are speaking of a hidden cache of smuggled radios, of a downed Allied airman needing shelter, of routes through the forest for those fleeing the new order. The dark humor here, of course, is that they are discussing these life and death matters with the same mundane solemnity they might use to discuss the merits of different fertilizers. The sheer banality of their courage is breathtaking. These scattered sparks, these individual acts of defiance, began to flicker across the vast dominion of the victorious Reich. From the frozen plains of subjugated Soviet Union, where former partisans melted into the forests, making every patrol a gamble, to the bustling docks of occupied Britain, where whispers of resistance networks traverse the murky Thames. Intellectuals, artists, disillusioned former soldiers, students, even housewives. Anyone who refused to let the flame of their own humanity be extinguished became a potential node in this sprawling, clandestine organism. The Gestapo, of course, was omnipresent. Its shadows stretched long and cold across the land. Raids were frequent, brutal, and terrifyingly efficient. A knock on the door in the dead of night, the sudden blinding light, the chillingly polite interrogation that would, invariably, turn to casual savagery. The The sound of a screeching car outside, the sudden silence of a neighbor's apartment. These were the constant reminders of the price of defiance. Fear was a weapon wielded with surgical precision, designed to isolate, to atomize, to ensure that no spark could ever truly ignite a wildfire. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, despite the gnawing fear that was a constant companion, the resistance continued to breathe. It was a testament not to a grand strategy, but to the indomitable, infuriating refusal of the human spirit to simply lie down and accept its fate. It was a refusal to forget, the refusal to believe that the darkness was absolute. Each shared glance, each sabotage machine, each smuggled message was a small, almost invisible act of faith, a quiet, desperate prayer that somewhere in the vast, suffocating silence, others were also refusing to sleep, and that in time these scattered sparks might just perhaps converge into something brighter, something that could challenge the suffocating night. The fight, you see, had merely moved into the shadows, and in the shadows, new battles were just beginning. And so, as the dust settled from the final, brutal campaigns, a different kind of silence began to fall across the globe. Not the silence of peace, but the quiet of submission. The new order, forged in fire and iron, began to cement itself, stretching its tendrils not just into national capitals and conquered territories, but into the very fabric of human existence. For the true victory, or perhaps the most profound defeat, was not merely won on battlefields, but in the unseen arenas of the mind, the heart, and the soul. Imagine, if you will, the slow dimming of the world's intellectual light. When the victors declared their new age, they didn't just rewrite maps. They rewrote knowledge itself. Picture the hallowed halls of universities, once vibrant cauldrons of debate and discovery, now echoing with a different kind of certainty. The purge began quietly, with academic decrees and meticulously compiled lists. Brilliant minds, if they carried the wrong ancestry or held unsuitable opinions, meaning anything that deviated from the state-sanctioned truth, were not merely dismissed, they were professionally annihilated, their research confiscated, their publications burned, their very existence expunged from academic record. Einstein, Schrödinger, Bohr, their revolutionary ideas, once the bedrock of modern physics, were dismissed as Jewish science or degenerate thought. Quantum mechanics, relativity. These were not just theories. They were deemed politically incorrect, an affront to the German spirit of empirical racial science. What replaced this vibrant tapestry of inquiry? A science twisted to serve ideology. Imagine the vast resources, once dedicated to understanding the universe or curing disease, now funneled into proving the purity of a fabricated race. Anthropological studies became exercises in measuring skulls and categorizing citizens based on arbitrary physical traits. Genetic research, far from seeking cures, instead focused on eugenics, the chilling perfection of the human form according to a dictatorial blueprint. It was science weaponized against humanity itself, turning the quest for knowledge into a tool of oppression. The pursuit of fundamental truths, the kind that elevates humanity, withered. Why explore the cosmos when the only truth that mattered lay in the superiority of the self-proclaimed masters of Earth? Why seek to prolong life when the state dictated who deserved to live and who was deemed unworthy? The free exchange of ideas, the very lifeblood of progress, evaporated like morning mist under a totalitarian sun. The international conferences, where the brightest minds from across the globe would once converge to share breakthroughs and inspire one another, ceased to exist. Instead, intellectual iron curtains descended, isolating entire continents of thought. Imagine a world where the cure for a devastating disease might be discovered in one sealed-off nation, yet remain unknown to millions dying just across an ideological border, simply because the sharing of information was deemed a threat. Progress, if it happened at all, became insular, specialized, and ultimately profoundly stunted. The future of technology might, for a time, appear to surge in areas directly serving the war machine: rocketry, synthetic fuels, advanced weaponry. But the deeper, more profound scientific advancements, the kind that truly expand human understanding and improve the universal condition, would enter a prolonged, agonizing dark age. The light of genuine inquiry, once a beacon, became a flicker, contained and controlled, forever pointing in a direction predetermined by the state. And then there was art, the soul of a nation, the expression of human experience, now subjected to the same ruthless filtration. Picture the great museums, not looted by invaders, but meticulously cleansed by their own custodians. Priceless works by Picasso, Kandinsky, Van Gogh, anything deemed degenerate, abstract, challenging, or simply not conforming to the narrow, saccharine vision of Aryan purity, were systematically removed, branded, and in countless cases destroyed. They were burned in vast public pyres, a symbolic incineration of individual expression. The vibrant, often messy, sometimes disturbing, but always honest reflections of the human condition were swept away, leaving behind a stark, sanitized emptiness. What remained? Art as propaganda. Imagine endless, monumental sculptures glorifying the strong man, the virile soldier, the fertile mother, all cast in the same rigid, uninspired heroic realism. Paintings depicted idyllic, sun-drenched pastoral scenes, or stirring and entirely fabricated moments of national glory. Music was reduced to bombastic marches, patriotic anthems, or folk tunes drained of any genuine depth. The nuanced, provocative, and often unsettling beauty of true art was replaced by monotonous, predictable aesthetic designed to pacify, to indoctrinate, to glorify the regime and nothing else. The artists themselves fared no better. Writers, poets, composers, painters, those who dared to express anything beyond the approved narrative faced exile, imprisonment, or even execution. Imagine the private agony of a sculptor forced to destroy their life's work, or a novelist burning their manuscripts in a backyard fire, knowing that their true voice, their unique perspective, was a crime. The bohemian cafes of Paris, the avant-garde galleries of Berlin, the bustling theaters of London, all silenced. The world became aesthetically bleak, devoid of the challenging, the beautiful, the truly human. The laughter of satire, the tears of tragedy, the joy of pure, unadulterated creativity. These were luxuries the new order could not afford. For art, when it is truly free, asks questions, challenges authority, and inspires independent thought. And independent thought was the greatest enemy of all. This brings us to the most insidious conquest of all, that of the human spirit. For even if a person could navigate the scientific purges and artistic dictates, how could they survive the systematic crushing of their very essence? Imagine a society where individuality was not just discouraged, but eradicated. From the earliest years, children were not educated. They were indoctrinated. History was a glorious, unbroken narrative of racial triumph, biology a lesson in eugenics, and critical thinking replaced by rote memorization of party dogma. The very concept of asking why was replaced by how can I serve? The erosion of empathy was perhaps the most chilling aspect. Constant propaganda dehumanized the other, whether they were the conquered, the dissenters, or those of the wrong race. Kindness became a weakness, suspicion of virtue, and reporting on neighbors or even family members for perceived disloyalty became a civic duty. Imagine living in a world where you could never truly trust anyone, where every conversation was carefully self-censored, every glance interpreted, every laugh potentially misconstrued. The simple act of speaking one's mind, of expressing a genuine emotion not sanctioned by the state, became an act of profound courage, fraught with unimaginable peril. What happens to hope in such a world? When joy is dictated by state-approved celebrations, when sorrow must be kept private lest it be interpreted as weakness, when dreams are permitted only if they align with the party's vision of the future, the human spirit, resilient as it is, would be forced to retreat, to whisper its true desires in the deepest chambers of the heart. Generations would grow up knowing no other reality, their inner landscape scarred by the constant pressure to conform, to believe, to obey. The search for meaning, that fundamental human quest, will be co-opted, replaced by the all-encompassing ideology. Old religions, if not outright banned, would be twisted, their scriptures reinterpreted, their spiritual leaders replaced by party loyalists. The very idea of an individual's connection to something greater than the state would be systematically dismantled. So, while the world and the victors might have projected an image of granite-like order of efficient, relentless progress toward a singular, powerful vision, beneath that veneer lay a profound and growing emptiness. The cost of such a victory was not just measured in the lives lost in battle or the territories absorbed, but in the silencing of inquiry, the crushing of beauty, and the slow, agonizing strangulation of the human spirit itself. It was a world without light, with a future stripped of its potential for boundless creativity and genuine human connection, would become a chillingly predictable, endlessly gray expanse. The celebrations, when they finally faded, did so not with a bang, but with the quiet, persistent hum of new machinery. The grand parades eventually gave way to the steady rhythm of construction, the tireless thrum of factories, and the measured footfalls of an omnipresent police state. Time, that relentless and indifferent sculptor, began to work its magic, chiseling away the memory of resistance, sanding down the edges of rebellion, and polishing the gleaming facade of a victorious Reich. Decades stretched into generations. The immediate euphoria of conquest calcified into a rigid, unyielding order. Europe, once a patchwork quilt of nations and cultures, was systematically remade into the sprawling Großrömisches Reich, a colossal superstate where the very notion of a border felt like a quaint, forgotten concept from a history book deemed unworthy of attention. From the Atlantic to the Urals, a uniform grimness began to settle, alleviated only by the monumental, imposing architecture of the new regime, concrete and steel titans rising from the ashes of old cities, designed to dwarf the individual and proclaim the eternal might of the Aryan spirit. You are there. Perhaps you were born into this reality, knowing no other. Or perhaps you remember a time before, a faint, flickering image of a world where people could speak their minds without a second thought, where the radio played more than martial anthems and meticulously vetted classical pieces, where the newspapers didn't all parrot the same carefully constructed truth. Now, silence is a language you understand intimately. It speaks of survival, of caution, of the invisible lines that, once crossed, lead to an equally invisible disappearance. The General Plan Ost, once a desperate wartime directive, evolved into a methodical, glacial process of demographic restructuring. The vast fertile plains of the East, stretching endlessly into the horizon, became the new breadbasket, the new frontier. Slavic populations deemed unmentioned were systematically pushed further east, toiling in resource extraction camps, their numbers dwindling under the strain of forced labor and engineered famine. New German settlements, meticulously planned and architecturally stark, dotted the landscape like geometric diseases, populated by families indoctrinated from birth, their children taught to revere the Führer and despise the others who once walked these lands. The land itself seemed to groan under the weight of the systematic reshaping, its ancient forests falling to make way for vast agricultural complexes, its rivers diverted to serve the thirsty industries of the Reich. The very air you breathe is monitored, filtered, and occasionally it feels owned. The Gestapo, along with its myriad internal security counterparts, became less a clandestine agency and more pervasive atmosphere. They didn't need to be seen to be felt. A careless word whisper in the marketplace, a flicker of dissent in a student's eyes during a propaganda lecture, an unauthorized gathering in a private home. These were not just infractions. They were existential threats to the purity of the Reich, and they were dealt with silent, terrifying efficiency. Neighbors were encouraged, subtly or overtly, to report on neighbors. Families learned to keep secrets even from each other. Trust became a rare and dangerous commodity, hoarded like illegal literature. Life under the legacy of iron was a study in contrasts. For those deemed Aryan, particularly those of pure German blood and ideological fervor, there was a measure of comfort, a sense of belonging to the master race, a path to advancement within the vast, intricate bureaucracy of the state. They enjoyed access to better housing, better food, and the privilege of ignoring the suffering that underpinned their prosperity. For them, the Reich delivered on its promises, order, strength, and a clear, albeit narrow, purpose. Yet, even for the privileged, the iron weight was palpable. Creativity, spontaneous thought, and genuine intellectual inquiry withered under the watchful eye of the state. Art became heroic, monumental, and utterly devoid of individual expression. Music served the state, literature glorified the state, and science, while advance in certain fields, primarily military technology and racial hygiene, was rigidly shackled by ideological dogma. There was no room for dissent, no space for philosophical debate that veered from the prescribed path. The human spirit, unaccustomed to such confinement, began to atrophy, its vibrant colors fading into a muted palette of dutiful obedience. For the subjugated, the undesirables and the racial inferiors, life was a slow, grinding descent into servitude and eventual oblivion. They lived in ghettos and labor camps, their lives reduced to a daily struggle for survival, their cultural heritage systematically erased. You might see them, occasionally on the periphery of the clean districts, their eyes downcast, their bodies emaciated, performing the most menial tasks, a stark and constant reminder of the Reich's unyielding racial hierarchy. Their very existence was a form of silent protest, a living testament to humanity's resilience. Even as their numbers dwindled, the global reach of the Reich expanded and solidified over the decades. What remained of Britain became a compliant puppet state, its naval power absorbed into the Kriegsmarine. America, fragmented by internal strife and the collapse of its democratic institutions, became a patchwork of German-backed strongholds and client states, its vast resources channeled back to the European core. Japan, a nominal ally during the initial conflict, found itself in a perpetual state of wary coexistence, its own dreams of an East Asian co-prosperity sphere constantly constrained by the overwhelming military and economic might of the German Empire. Other continents, Africa and South America, became resource colonies, their populations exploited, their landscape scarred by mining and drilling operations that fed the insatiable industrial maw of the Reich. This was the legacy of iron. It was built not just on conquest, but on an ideology that calcified into unshakable dogma. It was reinforced by a bureaucracy so vast and intricate that it became an organism unto itself, regulating every aspect of existence, from birth to death. It was maintained by a military machine of unparalleled power, ever vigilant, ever expanding, eternally prepared to crush any whisper of defiance. And this was the way to forever. It was a crushing certainty that things would never change. The propaganda machines relentlessly churned out the same messages of racial purity, national destiny, and eternal vigilance. Children were born, grew old, and died, having lived their entire lives under the shadow of the swastika, their minds meticulously shaped by its tenets. The grand monuments, built to last 1,000 years, began to feel like gravestones to hope, their cold, hard surfaces reflecting a future as unyielding and permanent as the structures themselves. You live in this world. You might, in a moment of quiet reflection, gaze up at one of the towering concrete edifices, its lines sharp against a perpetually gray sky, and feel profound, aching weariness. The Reich had won, unequivocally, and in its victory, it had forged a world of brutal efficiency, monumental scale, and suffocating permanence. It was a world where history had ended, not with a whimper, but with the clank of iron chains, the steady march of jackboots, and the chilling, eternal hum of totalitarian control. There was no going back, no escaping the shadow, only the enduring, crushing weight of forever.